This happened to me about 9 years ago when I was 15. To keep a long story short, it was a weekend, so I didn't have school and my parents allowed me to spend the weekend at a friend's house who lived nearby. It was late on a Saturday when we walked over to a corner store to buy something for my friend's mom. On our way back, we spotted somebody walking up and down the street who we didn't recognize. He was a strange-looking fellow, overweight, wearing a hoodie and jeans. He looked at us as we passed him by and gave me a very odd look, which gave me slight goosebumps. Nevertheless, my friend and I went back to our place and the night continued. My friend and I awoke early the next morning to the sound of sirens and loud noises coming from the street behind us. I looked out the window and saw what nobody would want to awake to: a fire. By this time, my friend's mom had awoken and asked us to come outside with her, which we did. We all walked across the street to a neighbor's house and looked up into the sky at the smoke from the fire. Once the chaos had ended, my friend's mom inquired with a firefighter about what had happened. They didn't know the cause of the fire, but did say that a woman was taken out of the house and to the hospital. She ended up dying the next day. It was an elderly woman who I didn't know, but my friend's mom did. When we learned that an arrest had been made in the connection to the fire, I was eager to see who it was, as was pretty much everyone else in town. When I saw a photo of the man, my jaw figuratively hit the floor. Well, I'll be darned. That was the same man that my friend and I had passed by the night before the arson. I couldn't believe it, and I still can't believe that I saw the perpetrator of a serious crime not long before the crime was committed. This happened to me when I was roughly 4 years old. Not super creepy, but it certainly contributed to my poor mother's fear of men, and consequently the one she instilled in me. When I was a kid, there was a company in my neighborhood that would drive around door to door and sell frozen meals and meat for relatively inexpensive prices. Given the fact that my neighborhood was preoccupied by parents with young children and the elderly, this service was quite popular, and my busy mom was just as much of a fan as the rest of the cul-de-sac. A few alternating people generally circled around weekly, and I remember them decently well, since my twin sister and I were very friendly and rushed to the door any time there was a visitor. There was a very straightforward but kind woman who just wanted to get her job done, a sweet young man who adored our terrier, and a man roughly in his 40s who was generally very outgoing and talkative. Perhaps stereotypically so based on his demographic, this story is centered on the last person. I don't recall this guy's name, nor does it matter for the sake of this story, so I'll just call him Creepy Delivery Guy. Like I previously stated, Creepy Delivery Guy was a friendly guy and outwardly quite normal. A clean-shaven, articulate guy who loved to talk about his daughter for minutes on end, who was about my age. He talked to my sister and I plenty while at the door about her. Even so, my mom still got a weird feeling from him, but dismissed them solely because he hadn't done anything to warrant concern. After a few rounds in our neighborhood, he asked my mother if he could use the restroom in a polite manner because his shift had been quite long. She hesitantly agreed, and he thanked her, then returned after an abnormally long time and gave us our order. After this, the shifts no longer alternated, and it was just Creepy Delivery Guy who delivered in our neighborhood. He requested to use the restroom every single time he delivered, and eventually didn't even bother explaining. Allow me to restate that he took an unusually long time in the bathroom. For my mom, the feelings of discomfort were intensifying, but she was much too polite. The turning point, however, was when, while in our kitchen, Creepy Delivery Guy described to our mother how his daughter had gotten an infection in her private area because she hadn't wiped properly after going to the bathroom and had wiped back to front. He turned towards us and smiled wide, though still talking to my mom, and requested that he could show my sister and I how to wipe properly so it didn't happen to us. My mom said no. What a shock. After that, she didn't answer the door when he came around, and whenever we saw him driving the truck in the neighborhood, Creepy Delivery Guy would glare at us. We later discovered through word of mouth that he was unmarried and didn't have any children. This happened to me about 2.5 years ago. I was 19 at the time. I'm only 5'2.5". Yes, the half inch matters when you're this short. I'm a female. I had moved to Seattle from a small town in California. My dad had always raised me to be aware of my surroundings and taught me how to defend myself at a young age. I knew if something bad happened, I would at least go down fighting. Seattle is a generally beautiful area depending on what part you're in. It's a big city, so it's an eclectic melting pot of any kind of human you could imagine. Rich, poor, unstable, successful, beautiful, disgusting, rude, kind. Basically any adjective and then antonym for it could describe the kind of people that live there. Gunshots were a frequent noise. Sketchy glances from people with drug-induced sniffles were tossed around daily. There are track marks, like speed bumps in a school lot, on the arms of some hazy-eyed lost souls that wander around bus stops and bars. You couldn't go into a store without seeing someone steal something or attempt to. Someone was always talking to themselves at least 20 feet away from you most of the time if you were in a populated area. Anyone that's from Seattle can tell you that there is a high rate of severely mentally ill people wandering around, filtering in and out of the justice system instead of getting mental help or medication. It was October. Seattle notoriously rains on and off, so a big black hooded jacket in my backpack was always a must. I liked keeping my hoodie up for the general rule of thumb that weirdos don't really mess with other weirdos. But this night was different, and I hadn't brought my normal nighttime creep attire. What I was wearing doesn't mean I deserve to be harassed, but dressing like a creep at night saved me from anyone wanting to interact most of the time, so it was just something I did to be more comfortable and look less approachable. This night I had worn a dress and forgot a jacket, so I looked really put together and friendly. I probably also looked stupid since it was October and didn't have a jacket. My friend had moved into my home to escape an abusive ex from our tiny town. She was just as short as me, and we were often told we looked like sisters. We decided to go downtown for her first adventure since moving in. That was our first mistake. We got downtown at around 10 p.m. thanks to public transportation. That was fine because in Seattle, the bus runs late, so we had a way home. Window shopping wasn't an option because stores had closed. Around 10 p.m. during a weeknight, most sit-in fast food were closing, and it was the end of the month, so we couldn't afford anything but that. I googled where a McDonald's was that was still open on the inside so we could get 2 burgers. It was an hour walk from where we were, so we decided to head off in that direction. As we got further and further towards our destination, the lights became more scarce and the area looked more and more seedy as we passed buildings. My phone went black out of nowhere. I had an iPhone, so it was really not surprising because that piece of crap was always on the fritz. My friend only had a flip phone, so it was useless in terms of directions. We decided to just keep walking and hope we'd find our destination by luck. And that was our second mistake. We walked and walked for what felt like a lifetime, still nowhere to eat. By now, we were in a crappy lit area across the street from a bar. We hear a guy cussing, yelling, and freaking out. People started yelling back at him, telling him to get away from them and go somewhere else. We started laughing because this guy was clearly on drugs or had too much to drink, acting like a total loon. There was power in their numbers because the creep crossed to the other side of the street we were on after being scared off by 10 or more people. Our laughter stopped upon noticing that he was headed in our direction. Our hearts sank, and he yelled, "Hey, slow down, nice legs." Of course, that was enough to make us speed up. "Hey, I'm talking to you guys," bellowed from what I assume was around 10 feet behind us. We start going faster. I opened my knife and held it in the palm of my hand near my side so it was a bit hidden, looked at my friend and told her to dial 911 as we were at a fast-paced jog. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. In that moment, I knew that if anything happened, it would be solely on me to protect us. Everyone has fight or flight, but people forget to mention the third option is freeze. Some people don't take any action at all, and that's their natural reaction to fear. He caught up to us. He tried to grab her arm. I managed to pry him off of her arm by pushing him with all of my might, still holding my pocket knife in the other hand. Staggering backwards from being pushed, he started coming towards us. "Call the cops now," I said, and she didn't. She looked at me like a deer in headlights, and that's when I could feel him behind me. I pushed her away and told her to walk the other way. Instead, she stood behind me, petrified. Fear consumed her ability to move, and she was stuck. He was mumbling, calling us names for ignoring him when he was giving us compliments. That's when he lunged at me. I pulled my knife out into plain sight, not being hidden in my hand. I put it to his red sweater. Side note, if you're wondering what he looked like, he had a peppered, very long, scraggly beard. His lips were chapped and scabbed. He had beady eyes and long dark hair that looked wet. All his clothes were dirty and torn. His scent could gag a maggot. After looking at my knife on him, he spit in my face and cursed at me. I started just stabbing air since there was spit all over my face and my vision wasn't awesome since I had stranger saliva in my eyes. I was just yelling "screw off" as loud as I could to draw attention to myself. My friend was still cowering behind me. He took off speed walking the other direction back towards the bar as I told her to call the cops. I wiped the spit off my face. She looked at me bewildered and ghost white. I grabbed her phone out of her hands and called. The 911 operator was useless. I told her my location and a description, and she sarcastically asked how they would find him if he walked away, and my description was like a lot of people that frequent downtown. The dispatcher told me I needed to stay there or no one would bother to check out the scene without a witness. That wasn't comforting. I told her I would stay there and wait for an officer. My friend begged me to leave, but all that kept running through my mind was, what if he comes after people that had froze the way she did? What if he came after someone without a knife or anything to defend themselves? I needed to wait for a cop. We hid behind a building, but in sight of traffic. Peeking behind the building, we could see he was pacing up and down the street, looking all around. 20 minutes passed. No cops. I called again. She told me they were on their way. 45 minutes passed. No cops. Called again. We told you they were on their way. 1 hour later, my friend convinced me to leave, otherwise we would miss the last bus. We made it home safely. I cooked dinner. 2.5 hours later, I look at my friend's phone I had left in the living room as I cooked. There was a missed call from the police department. I didn't bother calling back. Something horrible could have happened to us within that time, and no one showed up. Cops drove by us. I even tried to flag one down, but he turned on his lights and started following someone through a stoplight. The man was probably long gone by then, and honestly, the dispatcher's sarcastic tone about my description really made me feel like, yeah, he does look like your run-of-the-mill bum, so who will care enough to find him over this? But to the creep I pulled a knife on, hopefully you will meet a cop that actually does care about putting idiots like you behind bars. Me and my roommate, females, late 20s, best friends, just moved into this apartment, and yesterday was our 1-month anniversary of living there. It's in Ontario, Greater Toronto area. Great neighborhood, a little touristy, not a bad area though. The building is in great shape, but old, and many of the tenants have told us they've lived there for 20 plus years. We were assured the locks were changed before we moved in. I have a key, as does my roommate, the old couple that takes care of the building in their 60s and the general maintenance guy. I was the last to leave the apartment around 8 a.m. and I locked the door. My roomie got home at around 4:30 p.m., unlocked the door, changed, and left again to run errands. We both got home again at around 6 p.m. First thing I did was go to the room to change out of work clothes, yoga pants for the win, and I noticed that my closet looked messy. I had a lockbox of knickknacks, notebook, tissue paper, lip gloss, keychain, junk drawer stuff that looked like it had fallen onto the floor of my closet. However, the box was then put back up and some of my dirty clothes from my basket were inside. It looked like someone had rummaged through my dirty laundry and tossed clothes out of their way, which probably caused the box full of stuff to fall in the first place. On top of that, brand new clothes I had just purchased were still hung up but hanging inside the box, like someone was quickly sliding clothes on the clothing bar and had flipped some into the box. Because I'm very neat and tidy, I knew right away that this was not right. I didn't do this. So I began to rationalize, did Rumi do this? No, why would she do this? She wouldn't do this. If she needed something, she'd ask. Did I do this? Maybe I threw my pants in the closet and it landed in the box. Maybe I did leave this stuff on the floor. Oh well, weird. Anyways, essentially my inner dialogue. Cut to about 9:45 p.m. I'm in my room and all of a sudden I hear Rumi call my name, loudly, in a tone of voice I've never heard before. I go to her room and she said, "I found the gift you left me." I say I don't understand. The present in my pillow? I look at her from the hall and say I have no idea what she's talking about. I go into her room and on her bed is a dildo. My dildo. I grab it and say, That's mine. Why is that in here? She says, It was in my pillow. You didn't put that there? I tell her it was mixed in with my laundry basket. That's where I leave it to remind myself to wash it within a day or so. Now the wheels are turning and things are coming together. Someone must have let themselves into our apartment with a key, went into my room, looked through my dirty laundry, found the sex toy mixed in there, and put it inside her pillow so she'd find it when she went to bed. After being in shock for a few minutes, the reality sunk in, and I started to cry. Someone had access to our apartment for at least the last month. We decided to talk to the building managers, the old couple, and while they seemed to want to comfort me because I was an emotional mess, the husband most likely played it down, saying it was probably a joke, not funny, and asked if we gave a copy of the key to anyone. No, never. I think it was part of their culture or age that made them downplay it. We did call the cops, and they came within an hour or so. They took all of our info, and we told them the full story, and they had to look around. Honestly, they couldn't do much, and I figured that, but at least we have a paper trail. I definitely mentioned the handyman as the one they should talk to. They're going to follow up with some residents and the building staff. I also watched the property manager, an old guy, very sweet, and that handyman change my locks this AM. If anything seems out of place, then it's very clear it's either the staff or someone who has access to their apartment and keys. We're getting a camera that we can attach somewhat discreetly, and hopefully it never catches anyone that shouldn't be in our apartment. I was a single mother of 2 young boys. We didn't have a lot of money, so we would often drive down to a small state park along the Oregon Coast Highway. We would park the car and walk a trail through the woods to the beach. We usually had the whole beach and trail to ourselves, with the exception of an occasional surfer. This was almost the case the last time we were there. It was a Wednesday, and we had a good time talking about the trees, berries, and even posing for a few pictures. We rolled up our pant legs and explored the tide pools. It was fun, but we were tired and ready to go home. On the way back, a man came running towards us from another trail. When he stopped, his face was about a foot away from mine. I hadn't seen him as he had first approached, therefore didn't have time to realize I should be scared. I smiled at him and said, "Excuse me." As I started walking, it dawned on me. He should have seen us long before he came up on us. He wasn't dressed for a jog either. I started to think of what I would do if he came after us. There was no way to outrun him with my 2 little ones. My kids were talking to me, but I was so scared I couldn't think to answer, so I decided to sing the little song from their Yoshi video game, be careful," over and over, singing faster and faster, trying to make them walk faster. Finally, we returned to the car. I lifted them into the passenger seat through the driver's side. We didn't even need to have seatbelts or a change of clothes. We just had to leave, now. The following Wednesday, I received a phone call from my mom. 2 workers had been shot in the head at that park. One lived. The other, I knew, had not. It turns out that man had been released from prison 2 weeks before. He had stole their pickup. When he was caught, he claimed he didn't shoot them. He described another vehicle that he claimed was there. It was a perfect description of my car. This took place the summer after my freshman year of college, around 2014. I was a cashier at a large Walmart on a busy shopping center street. I knew the area, even though I lived in a small town about 40 minutes away. The drive didn't bother me too much since my mom and I went to this area pretty much every weekend. As a generally polite but soft-spoken 19-year-old female at the time, I happened to ease most coworkers into at least liking me. I'm a personality generally about harmony, and this was before I had completely developed the backbone to stand up for myself. Even now, I'm still working on it. Now, if you think I thought I'd be a target for creepers, the answer was no. I wasn't a cocky thing thinking I could take on the world. I was just a larger girl. Back then, I thought creepers only hit on small, really pretty girls. Yeah, They don't seem to discriminate. I realize being female is enough for some people, and everyone has their own varying definition of someone to like genuinely and someone to creep on. By this point, I had been used to speaking with coworkers of all sorts of walks of life. One man in particular who often flagged me down when I was nearby was this older Jamaican man. At least I believe that was his accent. The guy must have been in his early 40s. He was thin, not terribly tall, maybe 5'11". He was always smiling and socializing with people whenever he wasn't pushing carts. I, of course, would talk with him on the way in or out of work, or whenever he managed to catch me. Conversations with him always felt a tad awkward with me since I had a difficult time understanding his accent. Truthfully, I wasn't the kind of person to blame him for this. I just genuinely felt guilty for not understanding him. Though as a few weeks passed, his accent became easier to pinpoint. One day, I come in for a later shift. He walks up with me to the entrance of the store, asking the usual things that are normal for Walmart coworkers. How are you? When do you get out? Are you going to be working tomorrow? It was as we were about to part that he handed me a piece of paper. I looked at it, realizing he gave me a phone number. When you get out of work, call me, all right? He told me, smiling expectantly. My brain froze, not instantly sure how to process the information. I wasn't a think on my feet kind of gal like most of my friends, and this had never happened to me before. Yet he kept his expectant gaze. My brain stayed at a standstill. Okay, I reluctantly murmured. Satisfied, he walked off. Dread coursed all over as I made my way to the back room. My entire shift was spent nervously trying to think of how to approach this. I wasn't going to call the guy. I didn't want him knowing my number. I didn't even know him. Why would he want my number except for an interest in me? He's way too old for me. Was he taking my kindness as a sign I liked him? I was nice to everyone. All this did was increase my anxiety. I didn't call him that night. The next day he caught me just as I was in the entrance of the building. Looking back, I'm thankful it was where there were people. He was fuming, demanding to know why I hadn't called him. I made an excuse that I was really busy. He smiled again, just telling me that he understood and not to forget to call him tonight when I got out of work. I looked towards my shoes and he waited until I nodded before leaving. Once again, I had anxiety most of the shift, and I still didn't call him. Thankfully, he wasn't on my next few shifts. My next shift that he was on was earlier in the day. He tried to wave to me from a distance, but I acted like I didn't see him and managed to get inside before he could get anywhere near me. Around this time, I was moved to the garden center to help them out with cashiering. I also was taught basics on caring for the plants. Honestly, this was a lot of fun, and the people out here were even cooler than up in the main area. The only problem was, well, garden centers are right up against the parking lot. Half of the garden center was outside where he could interact with me. I was lucky that some of the other girls were working on the plants and I had plenty of customers to keep me busy inside. My shifts were semi-random. This night I got out at 11 p.m. We were instructed to park in the back of the lot so that the customers had the front zones. The parking lot stripes were even color coordinated for us. At this time of night, my car was one of the only remaining ones back. At the time, I drove a 1996 Buick Park Avenue. It stood out against other cars, and most people of my age group saw it was an old person's car. But I loved the thing. Apparently, my cart pusher coworker had taken to remembering it already, because even though I wasn't the only person exiting the store at 11, he knew to wait around its vicinity. I didn't notice him at first, but as I was walking, I eventually caught sight of his bright yellow vest. I power walked it to my car and locked the door. He continued to stride up to the car as I turned it on. I'm not sure what to do. Part of me is really uncomfortable and nervous he'll yell at me or something, yet my polite nature is too strong, and I freaking wait for the guy. I double-check that my door is locked and I roll down the window a small bit. It's enough to where I can talk to him, but he struggled to reach inside. Hi, just getting out? He asked. I'm surprised he didn't start off aggressive. Yeah, and you? I'm not out for another hour. So how old are you? I blink slowly, completely thrown off. My brain has no time to think of an excuse or lie. 19? Why? The words come out uneasily. Then he just smiles and lets out this casual, happy-go-lucky tone. Oh, I just love you. I look back and forth and back at him. Pardon? I love you. I just want to get out of there immediately. Thanks. I gotta go. Okay, see you soon, he says cheerfully, but somehow the statement scares me more. I try not to rip out of there, but go calmly, feeling his gaze still watching me. But I'm on the verge of panic, so I go into our rival store parking lot and proceed to freak out. I call a friend I'm close to at the time, who I know tends to stay up late and is a rational personality type. I tell him everything, crying and shaking wildly as the fear spills out to begin to wonder what would have happened had we got out at the same time. Would he follow me home? Oh, I don't want him knowing where I live. What does he want with me? My friend, meanwhile, is very calm and promises to stay on the line with me. He admits he has no experience with this kind of stuff, but then I remembered one of my longtime friends does. Only, she's a little difficult to get a hold of on the phone. He isn't really close to her, but he assures me he'll try to get a hold of her through Skype. He manages to keep talking to me the whole 40-minute drive home. When I get back, he tells me that he's managed to contact her and that she'll be calling me in a few minutes. She listens to me, tells me she understands why I'm scared, even in my own room. She used to have a full-on stalker. She advises me to tell Walmart management. I'm a little worried about getting him in too much trouble, but she tells me that the behavior isn't appropriate and that he might be inclined to do something he shouldn't if I just let it sit. I agree, and the next day I catch my boss to tell her. She listens and is rational about it, but understands and helps me file a report. She tells me that he does have the right to know about the report, and it might be a he said, she said sort of deal. That, and I didn't have the paper with his number anymore. I feel a bit uneasy, but I decide to go forward with the report. That day I'm working at the garden center with 3 of my favorite people. The only guy out of the group is a fairly tall and easygoing guy named Brendan. Now Brendan tends to be the one who stacks and deals with a lot of the crazier outdoor equipment. He also was the one who took the time to show me how to care for most of the plants. While I was outside, Mr. I Love You tries to come over and wave me down with a friendly smile. I turn and go right inside, bundling up with anxiety. I'm scared what will happen at the end of my shift and am nearly on the verge of tears imagining terrible possibilities. Brendan notices I'm off and asks me if I'm alright. I reluctantly ask him when he gets out. He says that he gets out in an hour before I do, but he's sticking around a while waiting for his girlfriend, who gets out an hour after me. I ask him if he'd be willing to walk me to my car without telling him why. Despite the fact that I give no indication about Mr. I Love You, Brendan asks about him. My surprise gives Brendan the non-verbal yes. He begins to tell me that Mr. I Love You is bothering one of our other co-workers as well. She recently was thinking of reporting him too. She likes her privacy and preferred to eat in her car instead of the break room. However, lately he's taken up to staring at her while she eats, her entire break. He kept doing this every time they had left a shift together, until she couldn't stand him doing it anymore. She was older than me, about Mr. I Love You's age, but much smaller than your average 40-year-old woman in physical appearance. I guess the only requirement for his attention is that you're female. Brendan agreed to meet after my shift was over and walk me to my car. Mr. I Love You stayed very far away, staring at both of us while Brendan walked me over. I thanked him, and Brendan was sure to stare right back at the guy while I got in my car and left. I believe that Walmart receiving multiple complaints about this guy is what led them to tell him to leave us be, and thankfully he complied, as I noticed him pass me a few times when I was back in the main checkout lanes, but he refused to make eye contact. Not too long later, he straight up disappeared. I don't know if he was fired or left, but I'm glad I haven't seen him since. A few years later, I received a message from my rational friend who I had called the night the creeper told me I love you. We weren't as close anymore, so I was surprised to hear from him. He apologized profusely, admitting he never took me seriously that night. I was amazed, reassuring him that he kept me calm and contacted someone who could help me. That's all I needed out of him at the time. He told me a girl he was close to had gotten into a similar situation that I had recently, only it ended far worse for her. He thought back to the night I called him and realized that something horrible could have happened to me. I was around 19 walking the mile home from work to my dorm. I live in a city, and the road I was walking down was a 6-lane highway with stoplights. It was dark out, but only 9 or so, and I was never really concerned when walking home. So then a car pulls up and starts driving beside me, inching along. He is in the furthest right lane, impeding traffic with his slow driving, but everyone drives terrible here, so nothing too unusual. He rolled down his window and called out to me. I'm used to ignoring catcalls on my way home, happen literally every day, so I just ignored him for a minute, but he kept calling out and started to explain that he was a firefighter driving home from work. He said that he could tell that I probably was headed to the university, so let me just give you a ride for that last mile. I said no thanks. He said, seriously, I swear I'm a firefighter. Let me show you my badge. He flashes something at me. He says that he was hearing reports before he left work that it was about to start storming bad, and he insists, look, I really don't feel right about letting you walk home alone when I know it's about to start storming. And trust me, I'm a firefighter. I know what I'm talking about. I said I appreciate it, but once again, no thanks. I've continued walking this whole time, and he continued inching his car along until the latest rejection, and then he speeds off, and I think hopefully that he is leaving, but instead, he pulls into a hotel drive about 5 yards up, blocking the sidewalk. I keep walking, but walk near the road to avoid his car, but as I'm passing, he starts to get out. A little side note, I was not really worried yet. I thought this guy was a nice stranger and a firefighter. He hadn't given me too many creepy vibes, and we get a lot of different types down here. I just don't take rides from strangers for obvious reasons. But then the security guard of the hotel started walking towards us asking if everything was okay, and Mr. Firefighter got a look of panic and hightailed it out of there in a flash. Then I got scared, because it meant that he was lying that entire time, and I fell for it. He really wanted me in his car, and he definitely planned something immoral. Doesn't help my nightmares that the city this happened in, like many cities, struggles with problems of human trafficking. This happened earlier this year. I work only 2 days a week, my fiance works the next 4, and we have 1 day off together. On his 4 days, I stay at home with our 5-year-old daughter. We have only 1 car, so that is why we work these shifts. We live on the 2nd floor of an old house near the square in our little historic town. There is a set of old wooden steps outside to get to our only door, which is in the back of the house. Normally, if someone is walking up those steps, if I am in the kitchen where the door is, I hear them. Also, I have a macaw, and he will hear them as well and either scream or start saying hi over and over again until he knows who is there. There is the bathroom right off the kitchen with a window that overlooks the yard and our parking spot behind the house. Now that the setting is complete, here's what happened. One of the days I was home with our daughter, I was in the kitchen doing dishes. With the water running, I may not hear someone on the steps, but I usually would, I think. My macaw, however, would hear anyone who was not trying to be silent. Someone knocked on the door. I never heard footsteps, nor did the bird. I turned the water off and asked who was there. No answer. I was not expecting anyone or any packages, and I was not dressed in clothes to greet the random public, so I didn't open the door. After a few seconds, the locked doorknob jiggled like someone was trying to open it. I went into the bathroom to see if my fiance's car was out back, in case he had his hands full and could not get to his keys. No car. I never heard anyone walk back down the steps, nor did I see anyone leaving the steps or yard. Since I didn't hear anything else, I just wrote it off as my imagination. Fast forward to that evening, and I'm browsing Facebook. There is a local organization that posts police scanner reports on their page. People can also post things they saw or heard, or what happened to them, as a warning to others in the community. They posted that someone had been walking into unlocked homes that day and stealing small items regardless if people were home. They were checking doors and only trying for unlocked ones. A while after that, someone replied in that thread that their 4-year-old had come into the living room and asked him, her father, who the man was in the kitchen. The father just assumed the kid was responding to something she saw on TV or was making it up, until we saw the Facebook post. In further inspection, he found some small items missing from his home. The man was never caught or identified, but there were several police reports from my town that day of someone trying to open doors. Since I asked who was there before he tried to open my door, He obviously knew there was someone home, and I don't think there is any way he would not have used some kind of force once he opened the door. So creepy thief who doesn't care who is home, know that I will defend my daughter with violence if I feel she is threatened, and walking into my house will be considered a threat. Before I start, let me preface this story with the layout of my apartment. There are 4 rooms and a living space with a door that goes out into a small hallway which leads to another door which goes outside. All the apartments are built the same and have the same furniture. So last night, it's around 5 a.m. and I hear a buzzing at my door. I figured it's just my friend messing with me, so after it rings about a dozen times, I get up and go to the door. Now, there is a hallway that separates my door from another door, which is how you get inside. So I open my door, and as soon as I do, a 6'4" man rips open the door, which must have been ajar from one of the other people in my complex, and comes to the little crack of my door I have open and shouts, "My name is Jose. This is my apartment. I'm tired and I just want to chill." His eyes are extremely dilated, as if though he were on every drug known to man. When I refused his entry, he turns around, and as I'm closing the door, full sprints into the apartment. So this man starts screaming that this is his stuff because he has the same TV and couch. I try to reason with him and explain that everyone has this stuff, but he calls me a liar and says he'll show me. So he goes to my friend's room, which I'm assuming is what room he has in his actual apartment, and opens the door to my friend who's naked in there with his girlfriend. He becomes furious, shouting at the girl, saying, "Courtney, how could you?" Her name is Sarah. So my friend gets up and tackles the guy where he lays until the police arrive, shouting over and over that his name is Jose and that he's just trying to chill. They ask him where his shoes went since it's snowing out, and he says they're in his jacket, but he didn't have a jacket, and why would shoes be in his jacket? So they asked him what his last name was, which he spelled out normally at first, but he kept ending with Jose. He then accused the officer of bullying and whipped out a cig from thin air and began blowing cigarette smoke in his face. He was detained, and I haven't seen him since. Moral of the story is, don't do drugs, kids. And to Jose, if you're out there, let's not chill. This was when I was 18 and lived in Aurora, Illinois. Anyone who has lived there can verify that there is a bike trail that crosses right between the city, running from east to west with a bridge crossing the river. A lot of the trail is surrounded by trees to give it the illusion of being in a forest. Near the bridge on the west side of the city, there is a homeless shelter called the Hassett House. I used to live there on the west side when I was in high school, but after I graduated, I moved to the east side because of cheaper cost of living. The friends that didn't go to the college lived on the west side, so I would ride my bike through the trails to get across the city. One day I spent most of the day on the west side at a friend's house, smoking and drinking and playing cards. I didn't leave until about 12:30 a.m. Now on my way toward the east side, I had to cross a very spooky underpass that passed next to the homeless shelter and finally crossed the bridge. Right before I was going to cross the underpass, I stopped, and then I thought for a second. Here I am, kind of out of my mind. It's almost 1 in the morning, and I'm about to cross this really shady area of the trail. I had to decide either go through the trail or backtrack and take to the streets, which would extend my bike ride an extra 15 to 20 minutes. I remember thinking to myself, screw it, it's not like I'm in Chicago, and I started riding toward the underpass. As soon as I entered the underpass, I smelt it. Crack. Before my parents' divorce, my dad used to smoke crack, and I always knew when he smoked it because of that tangy, ink-like smell. I didn't even think or stop, I just started riding as fast as I could through the underpass, and when I came out on the other side, I looked to my right, and for a brief moment in time, stopped. I saw 2 figures turn and face me, and they were squatting in the bushes. They turned as if though I had caught them off guard because they were huddled together, but I just rode my bike with all my might. I looked behind me again and saw that they were chasing me, trying to run me off my bike. I've been mugged before when I lived in Chicago, but the fact that they looked like shadowy figures in the dark made it 10 times more horrifying. I could hear them grunting and panting as they tried to catch up to me. The trees covered all the street lights and I was going extremely fast. I was afraid I'd run myself off the trail and they'd try to grab hold of me. I headed toward the bridge and thought that I was home free, but then I felt a rock smash against my shoulder. They started throwing rocks at me. The adrenaline was coursing through my veins. I had never felt so alive in that moment. I passed that bridge so fast and got to a main road before I finally slowed down and looked back. I remember my shoulder blade pulsing in agony. I was afraid they had broken a bone or something. I squinted my eyes, and after a good 30 seconds, I saw the figures on the other side of the bridge. There were actually 3 of them, and they looked exhausted. They stared at me from across the bridge before finally receding back into the darkness. I rode the rest of the way home as fast as I could, and when I checked my back in the mirror, I had a bruise that encompassed my shoulder blade, and it swelled up so bad I couldn't move my arm for 3 days. Probably the most horrifying experience of my life. I'm pretty sure that they were homeless men staying at that homeless shelter, and they were getting high on the trail. I'm sure that they started tweaking when they saw me.